Now that we've finished the relative clauses, we're ready to move on to the next section. And the next section here in the grammar introduction, we have examples. We have only a few. These are complement clauses of adjectives. Many verbs take complement clauses. Those are clauses that function as the patient or the object of a verb. Well, in our system, certain adjectives also take complement clauses. For example, John is ready to read that book. So to read that book is a clausal argument of ready. John is able to read that book. Same thing. To read that book is a clausal argument of able. John is afraid to read that book. So again, a clausal argument of afraid. Now here, John is afraid that Mary read that book. These are two different senses of afraid, as you'll see here. But let's go ahead and work on this section. So this starts at 37, clauses 137, and there are only 4 of them. Clauses 137. Okay, John is ready. So here's it's a clausal argument. If you look at the type, we call it an attributive patient. In other words, an adjectival object complement. So it's embedded, this clause is embedded inside the adjective phrase. And the clause, it's fully propositionalized. There's an agent, there's a verb, and in this case there's a patient, a direct object. John is ready to read that book. So in English, when ready takes one of these clausal arguments, we want big pro here. We don't repeat John. Remember, big pro is syntactically active but phonetically null. There's nothing in the surface text. And we want a to infinitive. So let's edit this adjective stated grid adjustment rule. And TBTA knows this adjective takes a clausal argument. So we'll set the agent noun inside the clause to big pro, and we want to set this to a to infinitive. Target tense and form. Okay, we don't yet have a to infinitive, so let's go to our feature set. Target tense and form. Okay. So if we generate this now, we won't get the to, the TO. Okay, John is ready, read that book. But we see that target tense and form has been set to infinitive. So now we need to write the rule that will see that feature value and provide the right morphology. That will be in the verb phrase builder rule. Down here, okay, select the participle. I'd like to change this. I want to change the name. Participle, and let's add a row. It's nice to keep your sections separate. Future tense. Let's add a section marker. Add row. And you need to include features on here, otherwise it'll apply to all verbs and you'll see it being used often. So now we have a section header. Let's move it up above. Okay. Now let's add another section header. Now let's add the actual row that will provide the morphology. So here we'll choose the stem and the preverbal slot will be filled with the word to. And okay, this row, the only feature is to infinitive, and this row Also, the only feature is to infinitive. That's fine. Remember, when TBTA is searching for which row to use, it will, once it finds a layer that matches, it will search all of the rows and save the last one that applies. So in this case, it'll save this one. So now if we generate it, John is ready to read that book. Generated text is identical. So let's save it. Go to the next one. John is able to read that book. So we'll do the same thing. Edit this adjective static code adjustment rule. Set the agent to big pro. Set this to a to infinitive. John is able to read that book. Generated text is identical. John is afraid to read that book. Now this sense of afraid, this is afraid sense C. See lexical sense C. And lexical sense C always has a clausal argument, and the agent of that clause is co-referential with the agent of the main clause, the matrix clause. So let's edit this adjective static code adjustment rule. So this is big pro, and this is a to infinitive. John is afraid to read that book. Let's save it. Okay, now this one, John is afraid that Mary read that book. This is afraid, and you can see their lexical sense D. And afraid lexical sense D has a different agent, and it has its own theta grid adjustment rule. So for this one, all we want is the complementizer that. And this one here, we want to keep the agent, and the verb is fully inflectionable. John is afraid that Mary might read that book. John is afraid that Mary already read that book, etc. So we won't mark this verb in any way. John is afraid that Mary read that book. Generated text is identical. And that, I think, is the last one. Okay, now we start complement clauses for verbs. So we'll conclude this video. I would highly recommend that you now go back and regenerate all of your sentences. I'll do it, but I won't do it in this video. How far did we get? John is afraid that up through clauses 140. Clauses 140. And we want to compare. We don't want to save it. Compare. So go ahead and regenerate everything, and if anything has changed, then that will be the beginning of our next video.